1968 for Ford was a pretty big transitional year. It was the first year of Shelby Automotive operating out of Ford headquarters. They had also started using a stable, quality fiberglass supplier in the form of A.O. Smith, and Ford welcomed Bunkie Knudsen as the new president. Planning for the 1969 model year, Shelby Automotive sought to further separate the GT350 and GT500 from its base vehicle, the Mustang, by offering features and options no Mustang had. Items like a 140-mile-an-hour speedometer, power windows, electronic fuel injection, and four-wheel disc brakes, to name a few items. But the differences didn't stop there. This model of the first-generation Shelby would have its most unique look yet. However, throughout this process, things changed. For the 1968 model year, Shelby American was dissolved and divided into three entities, with the car building side taking on the name of Shelby Automotive and moving to Michigan. By the start of the 69 model year, Carroll Shelby himself had all but completely departed the company. The Shelby vehicles themselves had gradually morphed from offering a pure performance car in 1965 to a premium upgrade vehicle in 1968 that also had a measure of performance to boot, but nowhere near what Carroll Shelby had originally envisioned. This doesn't mean that Carroll Shelby didn't have a hand in the design and marketing aspect of the 69 Shelby. He did. Remember, car models are designed years in advance, so they were working on this latest design as early as 1967. In fact, Shelby Automotive had plans and designs for new Shelby models all the way up through 1971. However, with Ford concentrating more and more on building up its own performance brand, Shelby Automotive received less and less attention. But then there was Bunkie Knudsen. While he brought a whole new design aspect to Ford, he had zero love for Carroll Shelby and, truth be told, had zero interest in working with him, which further strained the relationship between Carroll Shelby and Ford. All signs were pointing towards Ford going out on their own without Shelby Automotive. Like the 68 model year, these cars would be built on Ford's assembly line, meaning that it would share most of the mechanical parts with Ford's newest model, the Mach 1. Go, 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 go. Undeterred, Shelby Automotive pushed forward with the 1969 model. Unfortunately, while Shelby design engineers pushed for many options not available on the Mustang, the car the Shelby was based on, specifically the Mach 1, most of their requests were denied. Power windows? Denied. Four-wheel disc brakes? Nope. Electronic fuel injection? Not a chance. Upgrades like those would prove to be more time and money than Ford intended on investing. However, in spite of those denials, the 69 Shelby was the most unique among Shelbys of the time. For 1969, Shelby offered a sport roof and convertible in GT350 and GT500 trim levels. The GT500 KR was dropped as the 428 Cobra Jet was the only big block available for the Shelby line. The 390 would remain with the Mustang. As far as the looks go, let's start with the most striking view of the Shelby, the front end. In previous years, Shelby Automotive relied on a custom hood and nose pieces made of fiberglass to differentiate the looks of the car, making it still look Mustang-ish, yet something different. But this time, thanks to the people at A.O. Smith and their superior manufacturing processes, Shelby was able to incorporate an entire fiberglass front end, completely unique for both the sport roof and convertible. This new design was definitely what Carroll Shelby wanted to set the car apart from the Mustang, in spite of the Bunkie Knudsen-ish influences. You can also see how it heavily influenced the front design of the 1971 Mustang as well. This included front fenders, front valance, and hood to elevate the looks of the Shelby and further separate it from the Mustang. The new fenders featured somewhat functional brake scoops near the leading edge. I say somewhat because even though they scooped air, they didn't lead to anywhere. The brand new hood was adorned with 2 NACA ducts that funneled cool air into the engine compartment with 2 vents in the rear to allow hot air to escape. In the center of the hood, a 3rd NACA duct fed air into the engine for a ram air setup. Total scoop count for the front end, 7. The entire front end culminated in a unique front grille setup that incorporated single headlights on either side instead of the quad light setup on the Mustang. The front opening was outfitted with a chrome trim ring that followed into the unique front bumper that marks the first time that Shelby didn't use a Mustang front bumper. The lower valance was finished off with 1969 Mercury Cougar parking lights and Lucas fog lights. The final touch being a coiled snake logo with the Shelby name right below it. The logo itself placed on the driver's side, a throwback to the 1966 model. The roof and doors were standard 1969 Mustang, both sport roof and convertible. For every Mustang sport roof, save the Boss 302, the rear quarter panels were adorned with simulated scoops. But Shelby Automotive not only designed a new pair of inserts to make the scoops look unique, they took it a step further by making the scoops, like the front fender scoops, somewhat functional. Again, to be completely functional, the scoops should have been ducted to the rear brakes, but they were only dumped out into the rear wheel well. For the convertible top mechanism prevented the use of any type of scoop on the rear quarter, hence the simulated scoop for the Mustang and Shelby alike. Ducted or not, the brake scoops brought the final scoop total up to 9. The 1969 model marked the first time that the sport roof model didn't utilize any sail panel air extractors. However, the roof did feature a coiled snake emblem with the Shelby name. One last touch. All GT500s received a special 428 Cobra Jet emblem on the front fender. There were 8 regular production colors and 5 special paint colors, making a total of 13. The 8 regular production colors were red, black jade, Gulfstream aqua, Acapulco blue metallic, royal maroon, silver jade, pastel gray, and white. The 5 special colors were competition red, grabber blue, grabber green, grabber orange, and grabber yellow. The grabber colors ended up as standard colors for 1970 model year Mustangs. New for 69 was the stripe placement. In previous years, it was always a rocker panel stripe with the name of the car right behind the front wheels. This new design moved the side stripe to the middle of the panel. The name etched into the stripe on the front fender, and instead of one fat stripe banked by a thinner stripe on top and bottom, the new stripe is banked by double stripes top and bottom. They were also reflective. Offered in 4 colors, the side stripes were coordinated with the car color. Red and Gulfstream Aqua received gold stripes. Pastel gray and white cars, blue stripes. Yellow cars got black stripes, and the remaining colors received white stripes. This was also the first year that Le Mans stripes were not offered. The rear of the car featured a fiberglass trunk lid and end caps that formed a trunk spoiler, like the Mustang Sport roof, but larger and more pronounced. The convertible also utilized a new trunk lid and end caps to create a rear spoiler. The back side of the lid and end caps were opened up to accept a black lace molding with chrome trim and the Shelby letters also in chrome. 1965 Thunderbird taillights were used in the rear once again. However, this time the taillight panel was painted black. The license plate was moved up to in between the taillights to not only serve as a hinged fuel cap cover, but also made way for a center exit exhaust. Inside the trunk resided a space saver tire. On the interior, the goal was the same as last year, a grand touring machine, which meant comfortable yet functional. Fortunately, Ford had developed a Grand Tourer themselves called the Mach 1. The new Mach 1 featured its own interior that included their new Comfort Weave high-back seats, wood grain accents throughout, including a simulated wood grain steering wheel with the rim blow option, all of which the new Shelby received for the interior. This new interior was offered in 3 colors, black, white, and red. The new high back seats offered that mix of luxury and performance with an upscale look. All Shelbys received a 4-gauge instrument cluster that included a 120-mile-an-hour speedometer and 8,000 RPM tachometer. Like in previous years, the addition of the factory tach demotes the amp and oil pressure gauges to idiot light status, requiring separate gauges. These gauges are mounted on the center console made specially for the Shelby. It's not just a Mustang console with bolt-on gauge pod. It's made specifically to Shelby specs to house the gauges where the Mustang ashtray would normally go, with the seatbelt buckle holders moved to directly under the shifter opening, followed by the interior light and fog light switches, with the ashtray relocated to the bottom portion. The shifter received a cosmetic upgrade for use in the Shelby. Automatic cars enjoyed a fully wooden grip with a coiled Cobra emblem, while manual cars had two options: either a full simulated wood grain shift knob with the shift pattern cut into the top, or a half simulated wood grain with a clear acrylic top with the shift pattern image on the top. Like the 67 and 68 models, the 69 Sport Roof also featured a facsimile of a roll bar. When I say facsimile, I mean that they're not actually official roll bars, especially the 69. The 67s and 68s may offer a slight bit of roll protection, as these actually go all the way to the floor. For 1969, the bar goes down as far as the interior trim and bolts to the side, offering zero roll protection. They're more like elaborate seatbelt mounts, to which they do a phenomenal job, but that's all they're good for. For the convertible, the body and interior mods were pretty much the same. Full trunk lid, non-functioning side scoops, and once again a show bar encased in plastic, right down to the surfboard tie-downs from 1968. Also, convertible interiors were offered in only black and white, no red. The powertrain for 1969 changed most for the GT350. The 302 was dropped in favor of the 351 Windsor. This larger V8 was upgraded with Shelby's aluminum 4-barrel intake manifold and topped off with the Ford Motorcraft 4300 Series 4-barrel carburetor, rated for around 470 CFM. Air was fed through the hood to a factory Ford ram air setup. The stock steel valve covers were replaced with the better-looking black Shelby die-cast finned aluminum Cobra valve covers. Final power rating was 290 horsepower and 385 pound-feet of torque, the same as the 351 4-barrel Mach 1 with a cast-iron intake, so your numbers may vary. Power was routed through a Ford FMX automatic transmission or a wide ratio 4-speed top loader that finally transferred power to a 9-inch rear end with standard 325 open differential. Other optional ratios were 3-to-1 for both manual and automatic, with the manual receiving an additional ratio of 350-to-1. Traction lock was also optional for every ratio up until April of 1969, where only the 3-to-1 ratio was eligible for traction lock after that. The GT500 shared the same look as the GT350, right down to the side stripe, except it said GT500. With the introduction of the GT500 KR the previous year, the 428 Special Interceptor was dropped altogether in favor of the 428 Cobra Jet and Super Cobra Jet. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say Special Interceptor instead of Police Interceptor, check out the history of the 1967 Shelby on this channel. Unlike the 351 and the GT350, the 428 retained the intake manifold from Ford, but like the 351, received a pair of finned aluminum valve covers with no writing. The Cobra Jet was topped off with a Holley 735 4-barrel carburetor and fed air through a factory Ford ram air setup. Final power rating was a very conservative 335 horsepower and 440 pound-feet of torque. Power was routed through either a C6 automatic or close ratio 4-speed top-loader transmission. A 9-inch rear end came standard with a 350 open differential, with automatic AC cars receiving the 3-to-1 open differential. Opting for the drag pack gave you much more than the choice of a 391 or 430 rear end gear. First and foremost, the standard 428 Cobra Jet was replaced with the 428 Super Cobra Jet that featured a beefed up rotating assembly. Next, there was the external oil cooler, which also required the relocation of one of the horns to the passenger side. You also received a traction lock differential. As for the Detroit locker, it wasn't offered as a factory installed unit until November of 1969. So any 1969 GT500s that exist with that differential, it was most likely dealer installed. Also, while it was available for 1970 Mustangs aptly equipped, there's a very good chance that during the conversion of the 69 cars to 1970 cars, the Detroit locker was factory installed for 430 equipped 1970 spec GT500s. I just couldn't find any information that could confirm that. And dealer installed units were always an option at any time. For the suspension, Shelby once again left the upper control arms in their stock locations for production's sake, but stiffened up the spring rates both front and rear. The wheel size was also upgraded from 14x6 with E70 14 tires to larger 15x7 wheels wrapped in E70 15 tires. However, around April of 1969, Ford upgraded to F60 15 tires. With the advent of the wider, lower profile tires, the rest of the suspension was beefed up accordingly to handle the extra stress the wider, lower profile tires produced. These improvements included thicker tie rods and larger steering drag link, and larger 1970 front spindles with larger front bearings, although some early Shelbys have been found with the later spindles, as well as Boss 302 versions that can be identified with a KKX cast into them, or some vehicles may have a mix, one on one side, one on the other. Shock absorbers began the production run with the blue Autolite adjustable shocks from the 68 model year. With the addition of the wider tires and suspension upgrades, they were painted white, and while they retained the Autolite name, they were manufactured by Gabriel. 1968 models use a steel wheel with a wheel cover as standard, with alloy wheels for the option. For 1969, Shelby decided to ditch the wheel covers altogether and go with a single design alloy wheel. Designed even before the 68 production was completed, they're a steel rim with a die-cast center section. They look similar to the Magstar wheels of 67, but different enough for a completely new look. Upon release of the new Shelby, the reaction was just ho-hum. With the amount of muscle on the streets from Ford, let alone other manufacturers, the Shelby just wasn't exciting enough, as it has lost its raw performance edge years ago, so it definitely wasn't fast enough, and it cost more than its competitors. For example, base MSRP for a GT350 was $4,434 for a sport roof and $4,753 for a convertible. The GT500 was a little more, at $4,709 for a sport roof and $5,027 for a convertible. Include average options with taxes, license, and delivery fees, and I would wager that every brand new Shelby didn't leave the dealership for no less than $5,100 or $5,200, but that's only my guess. In comparison, Ford's Mustang Mach 1 was virtually the same car, save for the Shelby mods, and had an MSRP of $3,122. Depending on the options, you'd be driving home for well under $4,500. How about the other performance Mustangs? Ford's factory racer, the Boss 302, had a base price of $3,720. And Ford's block bully, the Boss 429, $3,948. Both cars offered more performance per dollar than the Shelby. Other cars that were also popular but with a lower MSRP than the Shelby: 1969 440 RT Charger, $3,592. 1969 Hemi Charger, $4,240. Camaro Z28, $3,184. However, the GT350 and GT500 were still nice cars. Not only that, it was unique. A head-turner to say the least. If you wanted to be the only guy at your law firm pulling up in a GT350, or you're a CPA in a GT500, it was well worth the cost. If you enjoyed hopping into your Shelby, slipping on the shoulder harnesses and roaring through the gears to hear the Cobra Jet growl as the RPMs rise, totally worth it. The 1969 Shelby offered style and uniqueness. The 69 Shelby wasn't without its problems though. There were issues with the fit and finish due to the hand-built nature of the car. One of the bigger issues was with the center exiting exhaust. Unfortunately, the exhaust outlet was too close to the vented fuel cap, and with the big block cars, they'd backfire out the exhaust when you let off the throttle. Those pops would ignite the gas fumes and set the rear of the car on fire. The resolution was to replace the fuel caps with non-vented versions and install tank venting that exited at the bottom of the quarter panel. Another big issue was with the wheels. There were issues with the centers detaching from the rims, and also the wheels coming off as a whole. Shelby added a note in all vehicles for customers to retorque the wheels to 100 foot-pounds after the first 50 miles of driving. Originally, the wheel centers were cast by a company called Cast Alloy for Keystone Wheels. The steel rims were produced by Kamafuji Enterprises in Japan. The centers were pressed into the rim and held together with epoxy. To remedy the glued-in centers, Shelby ordered the wheel centers to be riveted to the rim, but they still had the wheel torque issues to deal with. There was also an issue with the lug nuts not seating properly. After a few reports of customers losing wheels while driving, investigations were held by A.O. Smith as well as Shelby Automotive. Shelby Automotive's conclusion came down to a few items. First, the wheel studs weren't properly pressed into the axles and rotors. Next, the lug nuts weren't torqued sufficiently as a result of the chamfer on the lug nut holes on the wheel either being too deep, causing the lug nut to butt up against the top of the lug, preventing it to properly seat, or not matching the chamfer angle on the lug nuts themselves. To alleviate the problem, Shelby switched to a longer lug nut and sent Boss 429 Magnum 500 wheels to the dealers to exchange for the defective wheels. Eventually, a recall was issued for the defective wheels and they were exchanged for new reworked wheels. In spite of the glitches, the 1969 run went pretty smoothly. However, there was a huge underlying problem. You see, in 1965, when Lee Iacocca went to Carroll Shelby to build the first GT350, they used the car to go racing, a move that can be a boon to the popularity of any car, and the Shelbys definitely gained the popularity from its antics on the racetrack. Unfortunately, the 1965 GT350R was Shelby American's only Shelby race car, not counting the 67 Trans Am Effort Mustangs. They were Mustangs and not Shelbys. The GT350 became softer and softer over the years, along with the GT500, and the Shelby popularity on the racetracks began to dwindle. Across the hall, Team Knudsen and Larry Shinoda built upon the Ford-Shelby partnership in Trans Am racing and introduced the Boss 302, a small block Trans Am racer with a bad attitude that built the 69 Mustang a solid reputation on the street. In addition to the Boss 302, there was also the Boss 429, the recipient of a NASCAR big block with Lincoln tunnel-sized ports and semi-hemispherical combustion chambers. Finally, there was the Mach 1, the one that shared a great deal of its components with the Shelbys, and even offered a nice in-between to the GT350 and GT500 in the form of the 390 Mach 1. All of these Mustangs, the Boss 302, Boss 429, and all Mach 1 variants had a lower base price than the Shelbys and were direct competitors, all of which contributed to Shelby's dwindling sales. But it seems the biggest thing that made Shelby finally leave Ford was the Boss program. According to Shelby himself, without the expletives, Bunkie hated my guts, and he was about to fire me because Ford didn't need any in-house competition. And the Boss program was Bunkie's baby, and I knew that I would lose, so I resigned, taking my name with me. That was pretty much the end of the line for Carroll Shelby's partnership with Ford. In June of 1969, he ended his contract, thus ending the Shelby program. What's rarely mentioned is that Shelby Automotive had some extensive plans for the 1970 Shelby. Things like a more luxurious Cougar dash and instrument panel, electronic fuel injection by Connelec, four-wheel disc brakes, hideaway headlights, and possibly engines unique to the Shelby, and maybe even a Boss 429 engine. There was a big problem though. Upon Carroll Shelby's exit from Ford and ending his contract, Shelby Automotive's contract with A.O. Smith also expired. And even though Shelby Automotive had all of these plans for 1970 models and even 1971 models, all of these plans were scrapped, leaving A.O. Smith holding an inventory of unsold models with nowhere to go. To hopefully make the best from a bad situation, Shelby Automotive came up with a plan to convert the 69 models to 70 models, an extensive process that even required involvement from the FBI due to the conversion of VIN tags to the following model year. To differentiate the 69 models from the 70 models, Shelby Automotive proposed adding chin spoilers to the front and painting a pair of stripes on the hood. But A.O. Smith had a running list of ongoing costs incurred by Ford that kept building up. From special projects from Ford to work on the Cougar XR7Gs, A.O. Smith was owed a sum of money that Ford or Shelby Automotive had yet to pay. So with no new contract, A.O. Smith refused to do the conversion for Shelby. It was more than a year later before A.O. Smith would receive any compensation. As a backup plan, Shelby Automotive called on the skills of CarCraft, the company that did the final assembly on the Boss 429 to convert the Shelbys to 1970 models. So the remaining 69 cars were shipped to CarCraft to be converted to 1970 cars. It was more than merely slapping on spoilers and stripes. Anything that was 1969 specific had to be removed. This included removing the windshield to change the VIN tag, changing the carburetors to a manual choke, new distributors, and anything else related to emissions and the EVAP system to bring them up to 1970 standards. All of these changes were made at CarCraft, including the hand-painted hood stripes and new front spoilers that may have appeared to have been Boss 302 spoilers, but they were actually unique spoilers made for the Shelby. Final production numbers totaled 2,362 1969 cars, 139 GT350 convertibles, 821 sport roofs, 245 GT500 convertibles, and 1,157 sport roofs. Of the converted 1970 cars, there were a total of 788, 57 GT350 convertibles, and 261 sport roofs, 90 GT500 convertibles, and 380 sport roofs. There were also 8 pre-production prototypes. Like the previous year, Shelby entered into another contract with Hertz to provide GT350s to the masses. This time, Hertz ordered 151 GT350 sport roofs in various colors and 1 GT500 convertible. All were automatic cars with air conditioning and produced just like the other remaining Shelbys. Like 1968, there were no special emblems or striping that separated these cars from standard ones. Any evidence of a Hertz rental would have to be found out in the paperwork. As mentioned earlier, it was pretty much the Boss program that caused Carroll Shelby to cancel his contract with Ford. Well, at least the Boss program was one of those factors. Be that as it may, it turns out that at the start of the Boss 302 program, Ford was working to produce 200 very special GT350 Sport roofs, a Trans Am edition car that would have been grabber yellow with black interior. However, with the exit of Carroll Shelby, the Shelby name went with him and the project never got off the ground. But there was one pilot car produced, an Acapulco Blue GT350 powered by a Boss 302. Well, it's more than that. Whereas the 351 and 428 powered Shelbys were based on the Mach 1s, this particular GT350 was based on a 1969 Boss 302. So everything under the bodywork is all Boss. While it might be confused for a 1970 car thanks to the hood stripes and front spoiler, it has a 1969 VIN and 69 components. One cool accent to the car is where a GT500 will normally have a 428 Cobra Jet emblem on the upper fenders, this one sports a Boss 302 logo. Fortunately, it survived all of these years, has been restored by its current owner, and it frequents local as well as national car shows. The conclusion of the 1970 model run marked the end of the first generation of Shelby Mustangs, a very special and unique era of automotive history. Starting with the 1965 GT350, what Carroll Shelby began working with Lee Iacocca back in '65 was an epic partnership between two automotive legends. However, with each passing year, it was moved further and further away from the original vision. And with the new leadership at Ford, Carroll Shelby found no love there, and after a few disappointing years of control being rustled away, finally exited stage right to live to fight another day. While at the time, Shelby Mustangs weren't always desirable, especially during the OPEC crisis of the 1970s, but have grown in popularity over the years thanks to dedicated enthusiasts truly realizing what these cars were. They are now some of the most sought-after vehicles of all time. Of all the Shelby Mustangs built from 1965 to 70, there wasn't a bad car in the bunch. No embarrassments, no black sheep models, no exiles. They all in some way represented their creator, Carroll Shelby, in one way or another, even when he wasn't a big part of the program. Be it his pioneering spirit, to his rebellious attitude, to his genius innovations, every product that came off the assembly line was a piece of the late great Carroll Shelby. While each car is a tribute to him, the best way we can all pay tribute is to use these machines the way they're meant to be, by driving them. Whether it be a scenic cruise to take advantage of the grand touring aspect, or burying the throttle and smoking the tires and roaring through the gears to make use of the rich racing history that went into each and every one. The 1969-70 model year didn't necessarily go out with a bang. In fact, they sort of went out the same way that characterized the entire model run. Adventurous, slightly chaotic, with a touch of unsurety and drama, but above all, memorable. I suppose we wouldn't have it any other way.